Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the tragic life and death of a soul legend, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. was born on the 2nd of April 1939 in Washington, D.C. His parents, Marvin Gaye Sr. and Alberta Cooper, had married 4 years earlier in 1935. His mother already had a son by the name of Michael, but Marvin Sr. refused to raise another man's child, and young Michael was sent to live with Alberta's sister. Marvin Sr. and Alberta had 4 children together, 2 sons, Marvin and Frankie, and 2 daughters, Jean and Zeola. Marvin Sr. also had another son, Antoine Carey, who was conceived during an extramarital affair. Marvin's love of music began at a very young age, when he began singing in his father's church choir when he was just 3 years old. His father was a Pentecostal pastor who was characterised by his children as an extremely harsh parent. The children's upbringing was far from happy, with Marvin Sr. subjecting them to regular physical and emotional abuse. He would relentlessly quiz the young children on biblical verses, and, if they replied incorrectly, they would receive a harsh punishment. It is believed that Marvin would often receive the harshest of these punishments. From the age of 7 until he was in his adolescent years, Marvin would be subjected to violent whippings, according to his sister, Jean. Marvin himself was later quoted as saying that living with father was like living with a king, an all-cruel, changeable, cruel and all-powerful king. Marvin would often find solace in music and mastered both the piano and drums at a relatively young age. He was so disillusioned with his living situation that at the age of 17 he dropped out of high school, left home and joined the US Air Force. He had dreams of becoming a pilot, but when he was only given menial jobs to do, he soon tired of the Air Force. He faked an illness in order to get discharged. In his late teens, he joined a vocal group called The Moonglows. His indisputable talent soon came to the attention of the group's founder, Harvey Fuqua, and Marvin was subsequently signed by Berry Gordy Jr., the founder of Motown Records, in January 1961. Marvin became a session drummer for Motown legends such as Stevie Wonder and The Supremes, before making it into the top 40 in his own right with the 1962 solo single Hitchhike. His career began to take off. Throughout the 1960s, he continued to have hits with both his solo material and romantic duets with the likes of Diana Ross. I Heard It Through the Grapevine would ultimately become Motown's best-selling single of the 1960s. Throughout his career, Marvin battled with drug addiction, using narcotics as a way to cope with his struggles in life. In June 1963, Marvin married Anna Gordy, the sister of Berry Gordy. Anna and Marvin adopted Marvin III, the biological child of Anna's niece. Musically, Marvin continued to go from strength to strength. Duets with Tammy Terrell like Ain't No Mountain High Enough and If I Could Build My Whole World Around You only increased his popularity further. When Tammy sadly died from a brain tumour in 1970 at the age of just 24, Marvin was devastated. He swore never to partner with another female vocalist and also threatened to give up singing altogether. However, Marvin would go on to write the song What's Going On, inspired by the escalating violence and political unrest over the Vietnam War. Clashes with Motown followed over the song's creative direction, but when it was released in 1971, it became a huge success. This inspired Marvin to take even more risks, both musically and politically, and when the album of the same name was released in 1971, it opened up Marvin's popularity to a wider audience, while still maintaining his Motown following. The album would go on to win the Rolling Stone Album of the Year award. In 1972, Marvin moved to Los Angeles, and the legendary hit Let's Get It On soon became his second #1 Billboard hit. In order to capitalise on this success, Marvin reluctantly agreed to a tour. The following year, in 1973, Anna and Marvin separated. Marvin was in a relationship with Janice Hunter and they welcomed their first child, a girl named Nonna. She was born on September the 4th, 1974, followed by a son, Frankie, on November the 16th, 1975. Marvin's divorce from Anna was finalised in 1977 and he married Janice shortly after. This marriage was short-lived and problematic, ending in separation in 1979, followed by divorce in 1981. During the 1970s, he continued to tour and produce more music, but by the mid-1970s, a combination of an expensive divorce and him fleeing America due to extensive tax debt began to take a toll on him both professionally and personally. He moved to Belgium as a tax exile, and here he began rehabilitation for his drug usage. Fairly soon, Marvin showed signs of improvement. His time in Belgium seemed to put him back on the path to success. Following extended conflict with Motown, he signed a deal with CBS Columbia Records in 1982. He began working on what would ultimately be his last album, Midnight Love, which included the single Sexual Healing. This earned him his first 2 Grammy Awards and an American Music Award for Favourite Soul Single. Unfortunately, he soon began experimenting with drugs again and became increasingly anxious. He had personnel inspecting his food and drink, as well as hiring security armed with machine guns to protect him when he stayed in hotels. He began living with his parents again and soon fell into old patterns of violent fights and arguments. On the 1st of April 1984, the day before his 45th birthday, Marvin became involved in yet another violent dispute with his father. Marvin had been consuming both cocaine and PCP, which is known for triggering aggression, which possibly may have had some bearing on Marvin's actions that night. Marvin Sr. and his wife Alberta had become engaged in an extremely heated argument over a misplaced insurance deed. Marvin, who had so much rage towards his father and who was under the influence of drugs at the time, aggressively told his father not to argue with his mother. The argument continued, with Marvin Sr. verbally abusing Alberta. The fight spread to Marvin's room, who was by now in his bed. Marvin again asked his father to stop shouting at his mother and ordered him to leave the room. When Marvin Sr. refused to listen, Marvin pushed his father out of the room and into the hallway. A physical fight between the two men followed, where Marvin soon overpowered the older man. He continued to deliver multiple punches and kicks after Marvin Sr. was down on the floor. Alberta intervened and managed to get Marvin to return to his bedroom. Soon after, his father walked into Marvin's room holding a .38 pistol that Marvin had previously gifted to him. Marvin Sr. shot his son in the chest. The bullet perforated his heart, lung and liver and would prove to be fatal. Marvin Sr. then moved forward and shot his son for a second time, now at point-blank range. Alberta ran next door to the home of her other son, Frankie, and they called the police. Frankie ran to his brother's room and entered carefully, unsure if Marvin Sr. still had the gun, and Frankie saw his brother bleeding out in front of him. In these last moments, the legendary singer said to his brother that, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I had him do it. It's good. I ran my race. There's no more left in me." The police arrived shortly afterwards, and Marvin Sr. was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Marvin's sister, Jean, later recounted that her dad made it quite obvious and stated so openly on more than one event that when one of the kids ever ventured to attack their father, he would indeed kill him or her. Marvin was cremated and his ashes scattered in the Pacific Ocean. Marvin Sr. spent 80 days in Los Angeles County Jail before being released on a $30,000 bail. In May 1984, he underwent surgery for a non-malignant brain tumour whilst awaiting trial. As part of a plea bargain, the first-degree murder charge was dropped to voluntary manslaughter, and on 20th of September 1984, Marvin Sr. pleaded guilty to this lesser charge, for which he could face up to 13 years in prison. However, on November 2nd, 1984, Judge Gordon Ringer sentenced Marvin Sr. to a 6-year suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. The judge cited Marvin Sr.'s deteriorating health, stating that sending him to prison or requiring additional county jail time would be a death sentence. Marvin Sr. appeared to be emotionally and physically wrecked during the sentencing, stating that, "If I could bring him back, I would. I was afraid of him. I thought I was going to get hurt. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm really sorry for everything that happened. I loved him. I wish he could step through this door right now. I'm paying the price now." Marvin's sister believed that Marvin knew exactly what he was doing in his final moments. He had wanted to die, and by dying at the hands of his father, he would finally separate his parents so that his mother, Alberta, could live peacefully whilst firmly condemning his father to a prosecution and a life of continuous mental struggle. Alberta Gaye divorced Marvin Gaye Sr. in 1984, and sadly she passed away May 8th, 1987. Marvin Sr. died 14 years later, in October 1998, at the age of 84. 3 years after his father's death, Marvin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and 3 years later received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In 2013, Marvin's estate asserted that Pharrell Williams and Robin Thicke had committed copyright infringement of Marvin's song "Got to Give It Up" in their song Blurred Lines. The jury ruled that Pharrell and Robin had not purposely committed infringement, but even so awarded Gaye's family $7.3 million in damages and profit shares. Almost 50 years after the majority of his work was initially recorded, his songs are still well known and serve as a source of inspiration for singers and songwriters around the world. In 1984, the Mayor of DC, Marion Barry, declared that April 2nd, which was Marvin Gaye's birthday, would now become the Marvin Gaye Jr. Memorial Day, and since then a non-profit organisation has helped organise that day each year. That concludes today's story of the soul legend Marvin Gaye. Please like the video, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. For anyone that's interested, I've made a playlist of some of Marvin Gaye's music. I've put a link in the description. Please add any comments down below, and thank you so much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst, do you have any Marvin Gaye stories to share? Also, let me know if you'd like to see more music legend videos similar to this one. Goodbye.